Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today we are going to be talking about Scythe Expeditions. I'm going to walk you through how to play the game and then some basic tips and strategy. Scythe Expeditions is a 1 to 5 player game in which the players will compete for victory points, which in this game are actually going to be coins that are present in the game. The game has kind of a unique theme and flavor to it. In the game, a meteorite has crashed in eastern Siberia, and it's roughly 1920. As a result of the meteorite crash, there are some mutations that are occurring in local animal life. So it kind of creates this almost sort of like sci-fi horror theme. What's interesting about the cards, and I'll try to zoom in on some of these, it has a really unique flavor and tone. So there are these enormous battle mechs that are present. There's obviously sort of a sci-fi sort of feel to it, but it also feels a little bit like steampunk. So it's almost like you took Arkham Horror and mixed it together with steampunk. Something that I really like about the game are these mechs. So your sort of character is really a mech that travels around this Siberian area where the meteorite has crashed. And so there's a lot of different fun and feel to this, but these 5 mechs are absolutely amazing. And these are going to be your primary sort of ways to move and interact with the board. So overall, the art is absolutely fantastic, as I've shown you before, with all the different cards. It's also a very fun game in which there is some light style of like worker placement. There's a whole bunch of these little workers that you can use that ride around on your mech and activate different cards. There's also an exploration theme. So I'll kind of go ahead and look over the top of the board. A lot of these sites, and these are the areas that you're going to move to with your mech, are actually hidden at the beginning of the game. So there's an exploration component to that as well. And something else that's kind of fun about the game, and I mentioned this before, but we have this deck of cards, and this is going to be used as a deck building sort of game. So you're going to start with a primary character. You're also going to start with an animal companion, and this is going to form the core of your deck when you start the game. And as you move onward and onward, you're going to amass more cards in your hand. So thus a deck building sort of theme. There's an exploration style theme. There's also light worker placement theme present in the game. So it just matches and mashes up a lot of these different strategies, but it has a really cool effect. Very cool game, and I'm going to walk you through how to play it. So first we're going to understand sort of how to win the game and how to end the game. So as I mentioned before, we're looking to amass these tokens. These are going to be the money tokens that are present in the game. And each one of these is worth a victory point. So at the end of the game, whoever has the most money wins. It's a very easy way to tell. Now, how do we know when the game ends? And that's going to be determined by what's called glory. So each of the players are going to start with 4 of these star-shaped tokens, and these are going to be called glory tokens. And once you spend 4 of these glory tokens, it's going to trigger the end of the game. So what does that look like? I'll go ahead and just zoom over to the centralized board that is present in the game. And what you're going to notice in this section of the game board, these are going to be your glory objectives. So if you kind of look at these, and I'll kind of walk you through a little bit later what all of these mean. Once all 4 of these glory markers are placed onto the board, and you can choose which one of these objectives that you're going to go forward with. Once a player has 4 of these placed onto this board, this is what triggers the end of the game. And please note too that each of these glory tokens is going to be worth a variable amount of points at the end of the game. And how do we know that? We're going to zoom in on this little key that is present on the board in the center of the table. And if you look at this, each of your glory tokens can be worth anywhere from 5 to 10 victory points at the end of the game. And that's going to be based upon the number of quests that you complete. And I'll walk through quests a little bit later. So really what you want to be doing as a player is to try to complete these objectives and then place these glory tokens onto this board. It's going to give you a lot of bonus points at the end of the game. And it's also going to be a way that the game will end and trigger it. So let's say you're ahead in points and you want to maintain that point total. You're going to try to place these glory tokens out as soon as possible so that you can force the end of the game and maintain your leadership and position of the game. So kind of what we're looking at right here are different objectives. And the one I'm pointing to is the purple heart. And this is simply going to mean that you have to have completed 4 quests. So there's a little 4 beneath it. Once you complete 4 quests, you can go to a specialized position on the board and you can cash in and put one of these glory tokens onto the board. The next one that we're going to be looking at is the meteorite symbol. And I'll walk you through how this works later, but if you meld 4 different meteorites to your mech, you can put a glory token out. Next up, we have upgrades. So there are equipment upgrades and item upgrades that you can place onto your mech. If you do 4 of those, then consequently, you can gain that glory token as well. There is a single token in the game. It's a 20-point corruption token. Notice that it's 2 different colors. And what this means is that you have to spend 10 orange and 10 blue to take this thing off the board. But if you do that, you can cash in and get this glory token location. Please note that only 1 player in the game can get this. Next to it, we have a marker. It looks like a little gremlin or some sort of elemental smiling. And notice that it is orange and blue, and that's going to correspond to these corruption tokens that we talked about before. So if you have removed 7 of these corruption tokens from the board, you can gain one of these glories. Next up is 8 cards. If you ever have 8 cards total under your control, you can also cash this in. And then finally, the one that's probably the easiest to get is on the right-hand side of the board. And this corresponds to having workers. So what we kind of talked about before is that you can get these multicolored workers. So if you ever end up with 7 of these workers under your control, then you can get one of these glory tokens. And then next up we have exploration tokens, which are these tokens right here. If you ever have 5 of these, you can cash that in. And where do you get the exploration tokens? You can get those from the different types of locations that are at the top of the game board at the start of the game. So if you're the first person to go to one of these sites, you get that token, and thus you can claim that, and then you're going to flip the board space over. So really the name of the game when you're playing this is to think about which 4 of these objectives that you're going to perform over the course of the game, and thus score the maximum amount of victory points. Now that we know how the end of the game is triggered, I'm going to just go over here and go over this key on what this actually means. So the first icon that you're going to be looking at is the coin total. So what we're going to do is just pop these onto the screen. Obviously, each one of these coins is going to represent a victory point. So thus, you can amass these over the course of the game by various means. That will be one of the ways that you can score victory points at the end of the game. Notice too, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit more on this, but we have the purple heart is going to be the quest sort of icon that's present in this game. So if you ever have a quest, so thus I'm grabbing one from the draw deck right here, so you can see this. So this says it's a quest, and notice that there's a purple heart at the top of this. You want to complete quests over the course of the game, and there's 2 different reasons for that. I'm going to walk you through why that is. So first, notice that if you've completed 0 quests, what that means is that each of your glory tokens is going to be worth 5 points at the end of the game. So thus, if you've completed 1 quest, then it goes to 6. Then if you've completed 2 quests, it goes up to 8, and then finally, if you've completed 3 or more quests over the course of the game, it's going to go to 10 victory points. So you can see that there's a synergy between completing quests and also the amount of points that you're going to score from your glory tokens. So as a general overall strategy tip that I try to teach new players, and we go over to this section of the game board, notice that for this objective, we have to complete 4 quests, and thus we can place a glory token onto the game board. So if you, as a new player, want to focus on one of these categories where you're going to get the most number of points, this is what I'm going to recommend, because you're going to get a multiplier for your glory that you actually place out onto the board, and that's based upon this key over here. So if you think of it this way, that if you get 4 quests every single time you play, that means that all of your glory tokens are going to be worth 10 points. Then in addition to that, if you get 4 quests completed, what that means is that you can actually place one of these glory tokens out onto the board. So in my opinion, you are getting the most out of this category when you're playing the game. So if you're a new player, that's kind of what I'm going to recommend. Next up, we have items that are going to be equipped to your mech. And what is an item? Well, I'm going to go ahead and grab one. So notice that this is the exosuit. It says item, and then this symbol is located in the upper right-hand corner. And what this means is that this item can be attached to your mech. And when the item is attached to your mech, you're going to see a little point total in the bottom right-hand corner. Those are the points that you're going to score at the end of the game for this position right here on this scoring key. Now, just as a quick sort of aside, on the right-hand side of your mech is going to be a location for items, so I'll zoom in. Notice the little wrench is present right here, and then there's arrows over to the side. When you play cards in this game to your mech, you just simply tuck them under the board. So in this case, we would tuck it like this so we can see the text and we can also see the point total right there. So you're going to gain some extra points for placing items onto your mech. Then the final category that we're going to talk about is these corruption tokens. So we've now seen these multiple times in the game, and these are going to be these orange and blue corruption tokens that are present. If you get a bunch of these completed, you're going to get 2 points per each one of these tiles that are actually on your mech at the end of the game. So as another synergy, I'll go ahead and just pop back over to this board and notice that there's a section right here in which if we have defeated 7 corruption tokens, then we can place one of these glory tokens onto the board. So you will get a little bit of a synergy here as well, because it will, if you do 7 of these, it will allow you to gain a glory token. In addition to that, if you do 7 of these, it's going to net you 14 victory points at the end of the game. So you can get a little bit of a synergistic effect there when you score. On the screen is one of the player boards. I went ahead and just picked one at random. When you start the game, you're going to go ahead and pick one of these mechs at random. Then you're going to grab one of the color bags of tokens. In this case, I picked white. Then you're just going to simply attach the base to the corresponding mech. This mech is how you're going to move about the game board. Now, there are several things that we're going to go over really quickly. On this side of the game board, on the left-hand side, there is a tracker, and it goes from 0 to 10. And this is going to track these 2 different markers. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in on those very quickly. So first off, we have the orange one. This is going to be your power marker. And next up, the bluish one is going to be your guile marker. And these are going to be how you defeat corruption tokens that are present on the board. So there is this bag of tokens, and what I'm going to do is just reach into the bag and grab a couple of these corruption tokens. And notice that there's 2 different colors of corruption tokens, and these are going to match the colors of these markers that are present on the left-hand side of your game board. So thus, if you ever want to defeat one of these corruption tokens, and I'll show you later where these end up on the board, all you have to do is pay a corresponding amount of the corresponding color. So as an example, if I have a 3-point corruption token that I'm trying to remove from the board, I just simply need 3 points of power to defeat that token. So I'll go ahead and just zoom in real quick. So thus, if I wanted to remove this 3-part token from the game board, I would just simply spend 3 of these power points, and then I'd remove this, and this would go onto my game board. So throughout the game, you're going to see power and guile referenced, and that's what's going to be present on the left-hand side of the game board. Next up, I'm going to give a quick recommendation for new players on which glory tokens are kind of easy wins, and it's a good way to sort of get your engine going in the game. Now, some of the cards in the game are going to key off the fact if you have a glory token present on this board or not. So if you have no glory tokens present on the board, certain cards will have certain effects. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in on Olga. This is one of the characters that starts in the deck. Notice in the upper left-hand corner, there is one of the guile symbols. So thus, if you play this card, you get 1 guile, and it's going to be added to your guile tracker that we talked about before. But if I have 1 glory token, I'm going to zoom in. Notice I get an additional guile, and if I have 2 glory tokens out, then I get a power token as well. So think of it this way: if I have nothing on this board, this card is going to net me 1 guile. But let's say now I've got 2 guile tokens out, so every time then I play this card, it's going to give me essentially an extra guile, and then it's going to give me an extra power every time I play this card. So there is a need in this game to try to get at least 1 or 2 glory tokens out onto the board as soon as possible, because a lot of the cards that you're going to be playing are going to become more powerful if you have some of these glory tokens out and present on the board. Next, I'm going to give you advice on this one right here. If you notice, it has a card icon and then ×8. That means if you have 8 cards under your control, and notice that you're going to start the game with 2, so you're going to start with your leader and then this animal companion. So that's going to be 2 of the 8 cards that you need. And what you're going to do over the course of the game is get additional cards essentially into your hand so that you can use those. And this is a little bit of a subtle strategy, but I always try to get new players to think about this when they're playing. There's a refresh action in the game, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but if you run out of cards in your hand to play, you have to spend an entire turn refreshing, and thus what happens is everything from your discard pile then goes into your hand, and stuff just shifts back and forth. So if you don't have a lot of cards under your control, so let's say I only have 2, I'm going to have to rest a lot more often than my opponents actually have to rest. So I'm going to be wasting a few extra turns over the course of the game, in which I'm not going to be doing anything but resting. So one of the things I recommend is that you try to amass a hand of cards that are 8 or more as soon as possible. And the reasoning behind that is that it gives you more versatility of what you can play from your hand, and it gives you the ability to cash in and get one of these glory tokens early on in the game. So something else that's a little bit subtle about this, once I've actually gained this perk and this glory token for having 8 cards in my hand, it doesn't mean that I have to keep those 8 over the course of the game. I can't lose this glory token, so once the glory token's onto the board, I'm not going to lose it. So what does that mean? Then let's say I have 8 to 10 cards in my hand, I can start spending those and start attaching them to my mech. So I can start spending them for quests. I can start melding the meteorites to my mech. I can start attaching the items to my mech. And so that allows me the ability to start upgrading my mech, and I've already met one of these objectives. So there's a synergy there that I also recommend that new players tap into. And then finally, a very easy one to obtain is this one right here. So I just need 7 workers on my mech. And so I'm going to go ahead and just throw this on the screen. So I need 7 of these hanging out under my control, or I need 5 of these exploration tokens. This is another somewhat easy one to do if you're a new player. So as an example, if you like exploring, all you have to do is go to 5 of these locations at the top of the board with these explorer tokens to kind of clear that one out. So that's an easy win too. And all you have to do is just simply move to those locations. There's not really any danger if you move to a location in this game and you don't know what's there. It's not like you're going to be attacked and your mech is going to be destroyed or anything of that nature. So there's really no fear for exploration in this game. So think of this. These are some easy sorts of glory tokens to get. I highly recommend doing the quest glory token, for the synergies I talked about before. In addition to that, you need cards over the course of the game. If you have more cards in your hand, it's going to make your playthrough just a lot easier, a lot more fluid, and you're going to have more fun. So I recommend this one. And then the one on the right, you can get this one or not, but it's an easy win early on in the game. And once you unlock one of these glory tokens, then it's going to start accelerating the amount of resources that you're getting when you play certain cards in the game. We're going to talk about what's called tucking real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and just throw these 3 cards on the screen. We have a quest, we have an item, and then we have a meteorite. What you're going to notice on 3 different sides of your board, up here is where you're going to tuck completed quests. over on the right-hand side of the board is where you're going to tuck completed items. And then at the bottom of the board, this is where you're going to tuck completed melded meteorites onto your mech. So kind of what does that mean? Well, the game designers, and this is pretty cool, the game comes with risers, and if you see on the back, you just simply put them on the four corners of the board. That just means that this is going to be elevated off the table, so you can tuck cards under the edge of the board. So if you complete a quest, what you're going to do is you're going to take the quest and you're going to tuck it under the top corner of the board, so just that the heart is exposed. Every time that you do that, you're going to then gain whatever is in the upper left-hand corner of anything that's exposed. And so that could be multiple ones, so 1, 2, 3, or 4. Notice 2 at the top of the board. This says max 4, so it's saying you can only tuck 4 cards under the top of quests. Consequently, it also says that you can only tuck 4 items under this card, and then at the bottom of the board, you can only tuck 4 meteorites. And what that's going to do is that actually corresponds to these objectives over here. So the 4, 4, and 4, that's kind of what that means. So once you hit that objective, then you can place that glory token. So next up, we're going to have a quick discussion about items. And we kind of mentioned this before. If you tuck an item, you're going to tuck it so you can read the text and you can see the dollar amount for victory points at the end of the game. So you're going to go ahead and do that. And once you tuck this, whatever this text says on the right-hand side, this is going to be active all the time on your mech. So as you start tucking cards, notice too that your mech is going to start becoming more powerful over the course of the game. And then finally, we're going to talk about meteorites. And here's a meteorite card. It has this symbol. What we're going to do is just simply rotate it, and then you're going to see that there is some sort of bonus that is located at the bottom of the card. So this one says gain $1 per active card, max of 3. So if I meld a meteorite onto my mech, it's going to be placed underneath the board, just so that the bottom sort of scoring thing is present. So every time I then would add another meteorite card onto my mech, what that means is that it's going to trigger all the other different melded meteorite effects. So let's say I add another one on and it gets tucked underneath. It's going to then trigger these in order. So thus I would have another one melded onto my mech. So it trigger the top one and then it goes down to the next one. So you're going to get some of these bonuses like over and over again. So if you have a really good meteorite, meld that one first, because then every time you add a subsequent meteorite, you can trigger that effect again. So this is really kind of the tucking action that you're going to see over the course of the game. So some of the cards are going to kind of talk about this, and I'll walk you through a little bit later what more of this means. Next up, we're going to have a quick discussion about the flow of cards when you're playing them over the course of the game. There's going to be a play action. When you play something, you take it from your hand, and then it goes into the discard pile. So what's interesting about this game is that most games you have a hand of cards, and you kind of keep those hidden, so you would be holding those in your hand. In this game, your hand of cards is actually going to be exposed, and it's going to be on the table on the left-hand side of your mech. So any card that is face up on the left-hand side is considered to be in your hand, and it's kind of like an exposed hand. Then when you spend something by using a play action, you're going to take the card and you're going to move it across and place it on the right-hand side of the board. And then in addition to that, you're going to keep them in the order in which you play them. So let's say then I play the wolf later. I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to place it here. And so you can see that I'm placing them in order of how they are played. Once I have no more cards in my hand, I can no longer do play actions. So thus I have to take all of these cards and put them back over on this side by what's called a refresh action. And I'll go over later kind of what that all means. Next, I'm going to teach you about the term control. Control means that you have ownership of that resource. As an example, if I have 2 cards in my hand and I have 2 cards in my discard pile, I technically am controlling 4 of these cards. So what's the point of that? Why am I even mentioning that? Well, some of the game mechanics key off of the term control. So as an example, if I need to have 8 cards under my control to place a glory token on this location of the game board, what that means is that I have 8 cards total in my hand and my discard pile. So kind of what does that look like? Well, maybe I have 4 cards in my hand and then I have 4 cards in my discard pile. So what I'm seeing right now is I control 8 cards. It doesn't matter where they are. They could be on this side of the board, they could be on this side of the board. I have control of those cards. In addition to that, and we'll have a conversation a little bit later about what this means, but I have workers, and as I start amassing workers, they're going to go onto my mech. And then as I start playing cards, some of these cards in the bottom left-hand corner, they have an icon for a worker, so thus you would place the worker onto the card as it's being played to gain a specialized effect. So if I'm looking to see how many workers I control, I would look at both what's here on my mech and then what is actually here on the right hand side of my board. So just because a worker is actively engaged with doing some sort of task on the right hand side of my board, that still means that I control that worker. I'm going to have a quick discussion and a clarification on control. In this case, notice that there are 4 cards on the left hand side of my mech. I also have 2 on the right hand side of my mech. So my hand and my discard pile, I have 6 total. Notice that I have a quest on my mech and I also have a meteorite on my mech. Once anything is moved onto my mech, I no longer control it. So in this case, I control 6 cards. I do not control 8. The 2 cards that are attached to my mech, so this quest and this melded meteorite, do not count. Just like if I added an item onto the right hand side of my mech, like this item right here, like if this was tucked underneath, this would also not count as a card under my control. So once I start spending the cards, they're no longer under my control if they're attached to the mech. Now we're going to describe the 3 basic actions in the game. On your first turn, this cube is going to be located right here on your board. And notice above it says move, play, and gather. These are going to be the 3 principal things that you can do on your turn. On your first turn, what's amazing is that you can do all of these. So what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through move, play, and gather. So kind of on your first turn, like I said before, you can do all of these. Then every turn after that, you have to move this cube, and what you're going to be doing is covering up one of these spots on the board up here. Whatever is covered, you're not going to be doing that turn. So let's say the cube is on the right-hand side. You can move and play, or you can move and gather, or you can play and gather. And really the only rule is that you have to move this cube every single turn from that point onward. When you get to a point where all of the cards in your hand are depleted, so thus they're on the right hand side of the board, and all of your workers have been used, you might want to take a refresh action. So you're going to take this cube and you're going to move it down to the refresh step on the right hand side of the board. And when you refresh, just as a reminder, anything that is actually out in play on the right-hand side of the board, it just cycles back. So as an example, all of your workers are going to go back to your board. All your cards are going to rotate from your discard pile over to your hand, and then everything starts over. On the turn after that, you're going to simply move this cube from the refresh step over to this location right here, which means that you can execute all 3 of those actions on that next turn. So first up, we're going to learn how to move. So I'm going to go ahead and pop the camera over to the game board, and we're going to take a look. And let's just imagine that this is your first turn, and we're playing the white player here, this battle mech. What we're going to do is we can move our mech up to 3 spaces onto the board. So what we can do is move into an open position, or we can move through an existing mech. So as an example, I can never end my turn on a location where there's already a mech at that location. That's forbidden in the game. But what I can do is I can move through that mech. So as an example, I can go 1, 2, 3, and then I can end my 3rd space up here. Now, what's kind of fun about this game is there's an exploration aspect to this. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and pop over to the left-hand side of the board. Notice right here, we have an unexposed tile. We don't actually know what's at this location. So during our move action, we can move and explore a new location. To do that, we simply go 1, 2, 3. We're going to end on this spot over here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take this explore token and we're going to place this onto our game board. Next up, we are going to take this tile and we're going to rotate it over and then put it into the game. So notice this is the mining town. And then something I should probably have you take a look at is the icon located here in the bottom right hand corner. Notice that there's a 5+ listed right here. That means we need 5 or more total incorruption tokens to be placed onto this card. So what exactly does that mean? So when this tile was first exposed, we're going to take our corruption bag that we talked about before. I'm going to reach into the corruption bag and I'm going to grab tiles until I hit 5 or more total. As an example, my first tile that I pulled is a 3. Since I don't have 5 corruption or more, I have to pull a second tile. The second tile that I'm going to pull is this 5, and so now I have 8 points of corruption. I'm just going to stack them as they come out of the bag, and then I'm going to place them directly onto the board. And then finally, I'm going to place my mech on that location. As a quick clarification, all of the mechs start off the board in this sort of camp area. Once a mech leaves this camping area, which is denoted by this thing right here, the mech can no longer go back into the camp area. Next up, we're going to be talking about the play action. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out a little bit and walk you through a basic play. Play is going to be the term used to take a card from your hand and then play it, and it goes into your discard pile. So I'm going to walk you through really quickly how to actually do that. As an example, we're going to take this card, and this is Gunter, and he is one of the leaders in the game, and we're going to play Gunter. So the first thing I'm going to do is take it, and I'm going to move it over to the right-hand side of my board. And notice that this is going to be sort of my discard area, and this is going to denote that I am playing a card over here. What we're going to notice is at the top left-hand corner of the card, we have the symbol for Guile located on this, and then we also have 2 additional icons below. Now, when we're first starting the game, we're not going to have any of the glory tokens that we talked about. So these aren't going to be played, and we're going to just simply ignore those. So when I play the card, I'm going to get the bonus in the top left-hand portion of this card. So I'm going to play it down, and then I'm going to add 1 point of Guile onto my tracker on the left-hand side of the board. Next up, what we should notice is that there is a location at the bottom of the card, and there's a red worker here. If I have a red worker, or I choose to use it, I can then activate this special ability. So what does this say? It says gain a green worker or solve. If you solve, gain the core value of all of your solved quests. So in this case, we're going to look at our game board, and we are luckily going to have a red worker. So I'm going to take the worker, and then I'm going to simply place it onto Gunter. And when I place it onto Gunter, this allows me to trigger whatever text is in this box at the bottom of the card. So since it's early on in the game, I'm going to say, hey, having a green worker would be a great idea. So I'm going to go ahead and take a green worker, and I'm going to place it onto my game board. All right, so we're going to get into one of the important actions in the game, and that's going to be solve. So I just went through an example with Gunter, and in that case, we grabbed a green worker for our player board. Let's say it's a little bit later on in the game, and now I have the ability to solve. Solve is going to be the way that I can resolve a quest. So as we talked about before, quests are going to have a purple heart in the upper right-hand corner. And notice that this quest has a couple different things on it. The first thing that we're going to notice is that it has the number 3 on it. This means that you have to solve the quest at location number 3. Well, what exactly does that mean? We're going to go ahead and pop over to the board, and we're going to take a look at the airship wreckage. Notice that this is going to be quest location number 3. This is going to match this 3 in the upper right-hand corner of this card. So thus my mech is at the correct location in order to solve the quest. Next up, I'm going to make a quick note that when you solve a quest, the card just simply has to be under your control. And what does that mean? The card either has to be in your hand or it has to be in your discard pile. You can solve a quest even if it's in your discard pile. So there's no issue resolved around that. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to play Gunter out, and this is going to be a play card action. Thus, I'm going to add 1 point of Guile to my board. I don't have any glory tokens, so I'm going to ignore the rest of that. Next, I'm going to need a red worker, which I have. I'm going to place that onto the card, which allows me then to solve a quest. Since I'm at the correct location, which is location number 3, now there are some icons here that tell me how I solve the quest. So what it's showing me, and this is a little bit hard to see, there is a Guile marker, a Guile icon located on this card. So what this means is I have to spend Guile to resolve this quest. So what do? I go over to my board, and thankfully I have 2 points of Guile. I'm going to reduce my tracker by 1 point of Guile. Then below it, I'm going to gain a quest reward. And guess what that is? That's an exploration token. So I'm just simply going to grab an exploration token out of the supply. I'm going to place it onto my game board. And then finally, since this quest is completed, I can tuck this under the top of my card. Okay, and then also too, since I have resolved a quest, I'm going to increase my Guile marker by 1. And because anytime I complete a quest, I add all of these icons at the top. And how do I know that? Because it's actually on this card right here. It says, or solve. If you solve, gain the core value of all of your solved quests. So this is why I can gain this additional resource at the end of solving the quest. Next, I'm going to walk you through what's called Vanquish. Your animal companion and all of the basic animal companions in this game have the ability to do a Vanquish action. And what is Vanquish? Vanquish is the ability to remove corruption tokens from the game board and move them onto your player board as almost like a trophy. So as we talked about before, one of the objectives is to remove 7 corruption tokens from the board and take them as trophies, and thus you can get a glory. So this is going to be pretty important. It's going to be a pretty important way to build glory. In addition to that, we saw that one of the end objectives of the game is you can score 2 victory points per corruption token that you remove from the board over the course of the game. So this is kind of an important mechanic that we're going to be learning about. So next we're going to pop over to the game board and we're going to look at kind of what's going on. So here is our battle mech, and it's located at the mining town. And we talked about this before, but we placed 2 corruption markers onto the game board previously. And at this point, now we have our card in our hand. We have this wolf companion, and we're going to use it to do a Vanquish action. So let's go ahead and do that. And I have to do this as a play action, and we just talked about how cards get played. So I'm going to play this card. I'm going to gain this power token, and then I'm going to see if I have a worker, and I actually do. So notice that I do have a green worker. I'm going to place the worker on the bottom left-hand corner, and then this card's going to go into my discard pile. So next up, what I'm going to look at is that I'm going to have 3 power to eliminate the token on top. So I'm going to pop over to my player board, and I'm going to look to see kind of what's happening. So right here, I can see that I do have 3 power. So what I'm going to do is drop my power down to 0, and I'm spending my power. Then I'm going to pop over to the game board, and I'm going to take this corruption token off, and then I'm going to go ahead and place that corruption token back onto my mech. Now I'm going to look to see what else I have left. I do have 5 Guile remaining, so I'm going to pop back over to the board and take a look. Well, guess what? I can remove this second corruption token by spending my 5 points of Guile. So I'm going to pull this token off. I'm going to go over to my game board, and thus I'm going to reduce my Guile down to 0. So with this one Vanquish action, I can remove as many tokens as I want from the location that I'm at if I can pay the cost. Now, I don't have to spend them if I don't want to, but in my opinion, if you have enough of these points to spend, you may as well do it because you're only spending 1 action to gain possibly 2 tokens. Then the final portion of this Vanquish action is that it says if this Vanquish removes the location's final corruption, you may gain the revealed benefit. So let's pop over to the board. And notice that these corruption tokens were blocking this symbol on the board. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this. Now for this board space, this means that I can add an item to my mech. I can permanently add it onto my mech and I get those bonuses permanently. So kind of what does that look like? Now I'm going to pop over to my area over here, and I do have an item that is present in my hand and it's under my control. So thus I'm going to pop over to the right hand side of my mech, and we kind of talked about completing a quest, but in this case I'm going to complete this and add this item onto my mech. So I'm going to tuck it under the right hand side of the board, and from this point forward my mech has this active ability, whatever it says in the text box. And at the end of the game, it's going to score me 3 victory points. Next up, we're going to talk about a play action known as Rescue. So you're going to see on this card, it says Rescue another card. What does that mean? So let's say it is our turn and we have a play action. I'm going to take this card. We're going to stick it over here in my discard pile. We're going to go ahead and add the power token to my tracker. Next up, I'm going to place a red worker onto this to trigger what's called a Rescue. Rescue is I can take a card from my discard pile, and thus I can move it back to my hand over on the left-hand side of the board. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to rescue this wolf, and when I rescue the wolf, the worker is going to go back to my board, and then this card is going to go back to my hand. Be always on the lookout for rescue actions. You can set up some pretty cool synergies in which you can reuse a lot of your better cards over and over again. And always keep that in mind, because you might need, let's say, a vanquish action from your companion, or you might need a solve action from your main character. So always be on the lookout for cards with rescue. And the other great thing about it is it actually moves the worker back to your board. Next up, I'm going to walk you through Gather. Gather is always going to be keyed off of wherever your mech is and its location. What you're going to see at the bottom of the map tiles are rewards. These are going to be the Gather rewards. As an example, if my mech is at the sawmill, I can then gather whatever it is at the bottom of the card. I don't have to gather it if I don't want to, but it's just an additional benefit. So what you're going to see on this map tile is 2 different things. One, I have a green worker, and then I also have a red worker, but there is a slash in between. This slash is going to mean or. So I can either take the red worker or I can take the green worker, but I'm not allowed to take both. So if I want to gather at this location, I simply have to just execute what's at the bottom. It makes it pretty simple. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and take the green worker, and then I'm going to go ahead and place that onto my player board, and now I have an additional green worker. So what you're going to see across the game are a whole host of different options and different things that appear at the bottom of these cards. So as you can see, there's a pretty wide variety of gather actions that you can perform. So something that is really impactful are these reference cards. So each player will end up with a set of these reference cards, and they're just double-sided. So for the sake of this video, I just put them both out side by side so you can see this. And so all you have to do is basically go to these reference cards and then check to see what the actual gather action is. So we're going to go ahead and just do this one real quick. So let's say our mech is at the mech junkyard, and at the bottom of the card there are 2 purple cards, and one of them is outlined in yellow. So this is kind of interesting. I'll go ahead and zoom into that. So all we have to do is go to our player reference and look to see what that means. It says draw 2 from deck, keep 1, and place the other into the sweep pile. So that's a pretty easy action to do. We're going to go to our draw deck, and we're simply going to draw 2 cards from the draw deck. So here's 1 and 2. I'm going to flip these over and take a look at them, and I'm going to determine which one I want, and it's just going to go into my discard pile. So as we talked about before, anytime I draw a new card, it's not going to go into my hand over here on the left-hand side. It's going to go immediately into my discard pile on the right-hand side of the board, and I'm going to have to use a refresh action to get this card back over into my hand. The other card that we have right here, it goes into basically the discard pile. It's called the sweep pile. So I'm just going to go ahead and bounce over to the game board. Notice I have my draw deck. I'm just going to put this over to the side into the sweep pile. This is just simply means it's been discarded and kind of removed from the game. So as you can see, part of the fun of this game is to look at all of the different things that you can see at the bottom of these tiles. It also makes exploration in this game really exciting because as more and more of the game board is unlocked at the top, so kind of the center of the board is going to be hidden and is the top of the board. So you can see all of these locations up here that we don't know what's up there. As the game progresses and more sites are exposed, it gives you more and more options of where your mech can go and a ton of different gather action. I'm going to walk you through sort of a unique location, which I think is beneficial over the course of this game. It's going to be the crater rim. And there's going to be two icons down at the bottom, which are gather icons. And notice that there is a slash here, so you can do either these two, or you can do the one on the right-hand side. So we already talked about how to add equipment to your mech. Next up, we're going to take a look at this sweep action. So if you are at this location and you do a gather action, you can sweep, and what that means is that any of the cards that are face up on the game board, and what you're going to notice is that there are 5 different locations here of cards that you can draw. And these are going to be face up, so this is going to be the most impactful way for you to gain cards for your draw deck because you actually know what they are. If you draw cards randomly, you can't really control what you're getting and what's being added into your hand. So at this point, if you do perform this action, let's say you want this card off the table, we're going to take this and put it into the sweep pile. Then we're going to immediately replace it with another card. This allows you to kind of sift out some of the cards that aren't very impactful to your play strategy and thus help clean up the board. The next icon that we're going to look at is right next to it. This is the refresh icon. So we kind of talked about this numerous times before, how you refresh basically your hand and how you refresh your workers. Well, guess what? You don't have to take an entire turn to refresh. So I find this space very, very impactful, as does every player that we've played this game with. So after playing just a few games, every single player understands how powerful this location is. So they come over here, they gather, so they clean up some of the cards on the table, and in addition to that, it allows them to refresh their hand, thus take everything, you know, from the right-hand side of their board back into their hand. It also refreshes all of their workers. And so this is a really key spot on the board. At this point, we need to have a discussion on what's called melding. You're going to notice at the bottom right-hand corner of this card, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit, we have this icon, and it looks like a meteorite with an arrow. And this is going to be the icon for melding. So if we do this gather action, and this is an OR one, so let's say we do a meld action, what that means is that we can take a meteorite that we control. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our hand over here. Notice that we have one meteorite in our hand, and we know that because of the upper right hand corner. In addition to that, it says meteorite at the top. If we meld something onto our mech, we're going to rotate it. Okay, and notice that there's text at the bottom of this, and this is going to be how we tuck this card underneath. So once we meld, we're going to go ahead and simply place this card under our player board, and then we are going to gain whatever it says at the bottom. So in this case, it says gain $1 per adjacent location. So when I perform that meld action, and let's say my mech is here in the Weird Forest. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and place this down. So since there is 1, 2, 3 adjacent locations, I would gain 3 coins. And so we've kind of talked about coins before, but I'm gonna go ahead and just show this to you. Remember at the end of the game that coins are going to be worth victory points. So I'm gonna take this coin and I'm going to simply place it onto my mech. I'm going to say a note on melding. Let's say we have this card melded and this card melded. I do another meld action. I add this one on the bottom. Anytime I do a meld action, I'm going to start at the top and execute all of these, gather all of these sort of like meteorite actions one after the other. So I'm going to start here. I can gain some money. I can go to here and gain some money, and then I gain the money from the one that I'm just putting out into play. So what makes meteorites extremely important is that the first one placed can be triggered multiple times. So we can have a maximum of 4 meteorites melded onto our mech. So it's possible to trigger this top one numerous times over the course of the game. So be very mindful of which one you put out first. Next up, we're going to talk about how to obtain glory tokens. We've been talking the whole time about, hey, you need to get these, you need to get these, but how do you actually get them? All of the icons which you need to gain those glory tokens are actually hidden under corruption markers. As an example, I'm going to go ahead and pull these off. Notice that there is a star underneath. This means that you can gain a glory token as a gather action if your mech is at that location, obviously. So if you go to that location and thus you are meeting one of the objectives here at the bottom of this centralized board, you can go ahead and then take one of your glory tokens and put it onto whatever victory condition you have met. So in this case, we're saying, oh, I have 8 cards under my control, thus I get a glory. Now, you can only get 1 glory per time that you gather at one of these sites. The other thing that makes this difficult is that every single one of these is hidden by corruption tokens over the course of the game. So you actually have to vanquish and unlock those. So there's one location right there. Next up, we have the fishing village. The fishing village has one. Next up, we also have the encampment. And then we finally have the lair, which is location number 20. So there's going to be 4 sites in which you can gain glory. Now, what I've noticed in this game is that once one of those is unlocked, it's highly contested. So characters and players are constantly moving there to cash in their glory, and it gets to be kind of bogged down. One of the gather actions we're going to walk you through is this one right here. And this allows you to get any face-up card. So as an example, let's say our mech is here at the airship wreckage. We do a gather action. This is going to allow us to draw any card that is face-up on the table. And there's going to be 5 locations on the table. And thus you can draw any one of these. So as an example, I'm going to draw this one. And then immediately after it's drawn, you're going to replace it because you always want to have cards in that spot. There's another one of these, which I'm going to go ahead and just walk you through. And it's a little bit different. It's kind of cool, though. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. Let's say we are this giant buffalo mech, and we are gathering at this location. Notice that it has kind of like this star icon on it. That just simply means I can draw a card that's adjacent to me. So that's kind of strange. But our mech is right here, so thus we can only draw these 2 cards because we are adjacent to that location. So one of the things that makes this game kind of interesting is that with all the different icons for gathering, it really gets you to move around the board quite a bit and kind of get out there and utilize all of these different gather actions. This is the icon for rescue. And we kind of mentioned this before. This is how you rescue a card. Go over to your discard pile area. Pick something that has been played, take any workers off, and put it onto your mech, and then put that card back into your hand. This gather action right here is a free play. What does that mean? You're going to go over to your hand, and you can pick any card that you want to play. So you get a free play action. You can take the card and go ahead and play it, and use any sort of worker that you want. So that's kind of a good way. You could essentially move and then do a free play over the course of that turn. So what kind of makes that interesting? Let's say it is your primary turn where you have all 3 of these actions exposed. It's possible that you can play multiple cards on that same turn, thus giving you a highly impactful turn. This icon right here allows you to gain the benefit and basically do a gather action from any adjacent site. If your mech lands here and you do a gather, you can either do this location, or this location. Makes it kind of fun. And why is that impactful? Well, let's say this other mech is sitting on this spot and you really want whatever this gather action is, you can move to this location and thus trigger this anyway. Another highly impactful spot is the Ancient Temple. Notice that when you go to this location and you gather, you actually get 2 coins, which are going to be victory points. It's not uncommon, if the Ancient Temple is sort of centralized, for people to constantly be bouncing back and forth and gaining victory points over the course of the game. I've seen people gain just a massive amount of victory points by simply gathering at that location over and over again. There are going to be several combat-oriented gather locations. As an example, the research base, you can gather 2 guile. Next up, you can go to the impact zone and gather 2 power. And then finally, we have the fishing village, which is pretty cool. You get 1 of each, so you get a guile and a power when you gather at those 2 different spots. These are great ways for you to build up your power and guile tokens very quickly so you can defeat corruption markers on the map. I want to thank everybody today for watching this video. Hopefully you learned the basics of the game and some basic tips and tricks on how to play Scythe Expeditions. I'm also going to provide a separate video with just a basic playthrough of several turns for this amazing game. If you want to go ahead and check out that other video, I encourage you to do so. Now, when I do that other video, I'm not going to necessarily dwell on a lot of the different rules. I'm not going to walk you through all of those rules, but a lot of players are going to really enjoy that video instead because it just gives you a nice practical guide to how to actually play the game. I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.